Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Heracles Porsche, and here's my very thorough video showing 100% of the flowchart in Detroit Become Human. This is a good video for somebody who's done a playthrough or two of Detroit, and they want to see every possible way Detroit could have played out. Obviously, there are big spoilers to follow. We'll be talking about cross-chapter impact a lot, some of the more challenging parts of the flowchart to unlock, as some of the more surprising things I experienced while I was doing every single part of Detroit Become Human's flowchart. We're going to be going back to the very beginning, and without any further ado, let's get started. So this is the first level of Detroit Become Human. Anyone who's been playing since demo is probably very familiar with everything that's happened here. No good reason not to save the fish. Gets you some more software instability. And as you can see, we've got the 6 endings here that we've all been able to experience since the end of the demo. There's not too much cross-chapter impact in this part of the flowchart. I would say saving the wounded cop, as you can see there. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the legend. I'll do a quick look at it here. You can see the cross-chapter impact stuff was with yellow. There are no there are no locked paths anymore because I've unlocked literally everything. And gives you a quick look at the legend there. But yeah, saving the wounded cop. It's not a major cross-chapter impact, but you will get to see that cop much later on towards the end of the game. So. And also you get a little bit of public opinion for saving the cop. I would say be honest with Deviant is, if there was any part of this flowchart that I missed a lot, it was that, because you basically go to last chance and be honest. It has nothing to do with be honest about the gun. So for anyone missing that part of the flowchart, that's how you unlock that. Alright, there's no flowchart to show in the opening sequence. Next up is the first level with Marcus. It's shades of color. It's literally just Marcus walking around in the park and picking up some paints for his father figure Carl. It's pretty easy to find everything if you just look around, especially as you exit the park. Look to your left and right, and if you just look around, you should be able to find everything on this level. Pretty easy, straightforward level, not much cross-chapter impact. Here's a new home. This is the first level where you get to play as Kara, and there is certainly some significant cross-chapter impact on this. Mostly it is just a matter of looking around and finding everything and doing all of the chores, cleaning up Todd's house. I think it's more or less obligatory to discover the way down when you ventilate the room. But not necessarily everybody will find the pills. And Kara seeing the gun is the first piece of, I'd say, significant cross-chapter impact. So when you're tidying Todd's room, it doesn't hurt to spot those pills and the gun. And also, this is the first chapter you could start building some negative reputation with Alice if you were trying to do a distant playthrough. And this is the painter. This is the first level you get to have Marcus having a conversation with Carl. It's a nice, gentle, peaceful level in contrast to a lot of what you'll experience in Detroit. And believe it or not, there's no obvious cross-chapter impact from this level. But when you choose to either play chess, read the book, or play piano, that will come back in some minor but big span that you have to plan flowchart progress. So definitely remember that. I'll cover that more when we get back to Night of the Soul. So you've got some straightforward parts at the start of the level where you're introduced to Carl. Then it's kind of playing around, picking some things to do, and then towards the end you're asked to paint a painting. Now I've been uploading clips of all the various paintings that you can possibly do. You don't actually need to do all 12 paintings to get all your flowchart progress. You just have to pick android's humanity and identity to get all your flowchart progress. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward level. But just remember, over 3 long playthroughs to do the piano chess in the book, if you're planning to go for 100% flowchart. And this is partners. This is, you start the level in Jimmy's bar and you go to a crime scene. This is the first level where Hank and Connor are introduced to each other. There, you have the opportunity right off the bat to gain or lose a bunch of reputation with Hank, and this also could impact the investigation if you were somehow not able to do the investigation on time. Although you can see from the world statistics, it's pretty rare. It's mostly just, again, for the start of the level, it's mostly just a matter of looking around and finding everything. Although to get 100%, you would have to come back and goof it a couple different times in different ways. You have to, and there's some bottom parts of the flowchart here that relate to the spilling of the drink and whether Hank will give you your 5 more minutes to investigate or not. But than that, it's not too difficult to unlock everything as long as you're willing to come back and goof this chapter a couple times. Obviously, you need to do a successful playthrough of partners to do the interrogation level. So this is Stormy Night. This is a bit of a tough level to get through emotionally because you've got to watch an angry man abuse 2 androids that look like a woman and a little girl. But as you can see, it's a very elaborate looking flowchart. We'll try to get through it. We'll zoom in here and go through it a little more slowly. So this is the first time you're introduced to deviancy, as you can see here. So obviously, to do anything interesting with the character Kara, she's got to become deviant, which basically, means her manifesting her free will. And you've got a lot of options here for saving Alice from Todd, or alternatively having some horrible things happen and a couple of the main characters dying and you never getting to see them again. But obviously, if it's one of your early playthroughs, you want to keep Kara and Alice alive because there's just so many chapters to play through with these characters. At some point, if you want to get your whole flowchart unlocked, you'll have to come back and watch horrible things happen to Alice and Kara, which is really not easy. I would say emotionally, out of all the flowchart that I did, this was the most difficult. Some parts of it you can only unlock if you are playing on the harder difficulty. The absolute hardest part of the flowchart to unlock, I'm trying to think, that's the part that leads to Kara. Todd broke Kara downstairs. As you can see, 0% unlocked because there's basically safeguards to keep you from losing this level. So to lose this level, you basically I had to get pushed over by Todd, then completely fail all my QTEs in the first fight with him, then fail the QTEs when I tried to escape through the front door, and then finally fail all the QTEs, that's quick time events, when I was in another fight with Todd downstairs, and finally just Kara completely broke down. So it's very hard to lose that fight downstairs, but that is how you do it. And this was what I did on my last playthrough. This is one of the more surprising things that can happen, is that if you remember to go for the gun, you have to have found the pills when Alice was cleaning in when Kara was cleaning in the previous chapter. And one of the more surprising things that can happen is if it doesn't matter how well you do the first part of the QTE, if you don't do the QTE where Kara runs for the weapon properly, the gun gets thrown across the room, and Alice ends up shooting Todd to save Kara. So that's probably one of the rare sequences most people won't see. And obviously finishing that level with the gun has quite a bit of cross-chapter impact, as I'll show you later. So definitely, if you're going for big flowchart progress, definitely doesn't hurt to finish that level with a gun. I had to go back and do that one a lot, because obviously any level that ends with the characters dying, you got to go back and do a lot. So this is broken. It's a short level where there's a confrontation that comes from Carl's son coming back to try to steal things from Carl. Mark, as you can see, Marcus always becomes deviant. It's just an important part of the plot. You can choose to so you get your free will, but you can basically choose if you're going to fight Leo when he's misbehaving or not. If you doesn't really show here on the chart, but if you decide to push Leo, basically that is going to keep Carl alive. It's not altogether clear why that shows. Somehow I guess it's less of a strain on Carl if you choose to defend yourself rather than just take a beating from Leo. Other than that, it's a little hard to understand why things play out that way. But if you want to keep Carl alive, you've got to push Leo. And big spoiler, a lot of players will assume that Leo dies, but he actually doesn't. But you want to. I'll relate that there's some reasons to keep Carl alive for flowchart progress. I'll get into that in the second to last level. So here we are in the interrogation. Remember, you had to unlock this level by finding the suspect and partners, which most people will. It's really not difficult. Basically, as you can see here, there's 4 ways that the level can play out. As you can see, one of the parts of the flowchart most people will miss is if you probe the android's memory just to get the investigation over with. Obviously, it doesn't make it a happy ending. You can go back, look at the android, and just do a quick piece of dialogue. So that's the more obscure part of this flowchart to unlock. Let's see here. So obviously this isn't quite the best result. The best result is to try and convince the android. You need between about 50 and 75% stress on the android, which you can raise by saying stressful things. Just maybe one dialogue choice that's kind to make sure you don't go overboard. And then the android is stressed enough, then you intervene at the end, big dramatic scene, and that's the best result to this because you get an extra clue for Jericho, and you'll get lots of software instability, and Amanda approval, which doesn't really matter, and Hank approval, which does matter. So the best result is Android was sent back to its cell. Usually the majority of players got that, but a lot of players, of course, might have clicked a picker path, and then they intervened, and then they got shot by the android, and then the android died, which is one of the worst results. So yeah, just remember, convince is what gives you all the best options. Obviously, you should be able to see from this flowchart all the different ways that things can play out. And here we're in fugitives. So after fleeing Todd's living space, regardless of whether he's alive or deceased, you are now looking for shelter for... It's pretty elaborate flowchart, as you can see. You're trying to find shelter for Car and Alice. Now, coming into this level with the gun is the bigger part of the... We'll go down here to the supermarket. You can see it gets pretty elaborate down here at the supermarket. So to get a lot of the options does require going to having the gun, as you can see. So you can see there's a couple different things that string out from having the gun. So I'll get into the items you can steal because that's important for other parts of the progress here. So as you can see in the very left side, you have the option to basically steal the chocolate bar or steal a tie. The wire cutters most people will miss because you can only steal the wire cutters if you stole the fence, or sorry, saw the fence. That can happen. That you need to basically go by where the squad is and look at the fence a couple times, and then Card realizes she needs some wire cutters. But you'd also somehow not have taken the absolutely free wire cutters you can get on this level. So you have the option here to steal one of these three items. I would definitely recommend stealing at least one of these items on every single playthrough that you're doing. And what I would, the reason I would do that is because I'll show you some other parts of the flowchart in a minute that are significant. Another thing I would remember, if you try to steal two items, the clerk will catch you. And the only way to steal two items successfully is to have the gun create some significant Alice disapproval. But you can steal two items. Obviously, you don't need the wire cutters as badly, but you'll need to either steal or leave them a couple times to finish off your flowchart. And obviously, there's a so if you have to threaten the clerk after stealing two items, you can steal the money as well. You can also just intentionally rob the place, and of course you can steal discreetly, which I think a lot of players will do. But you can intentionally hold up the place with your gun. You can see there's a string of various choices that flow from that, so you'll have to do that. Come through here maybe 3 times with the gun and rob the place to fill out your flowchart. One of the more surprising things is at the end of it, if you don't tell him to hold still or turn around, he can grab his own gun, and you can actually talk him into giving you the money when you're both pointing guns at each other, which is one of the more sequences I think a lot of players will miss out on. So obviously, there's the laundromat's pretty straightforward. If you are trying to steal the clothes, obviously Alice disapproves of you stealing the clothes. If you try to steal the clothes and you goof, you have to leave without getting the clothes. So that's how you get that. So stealing the money and the clothes together is the only option for going in the motel. Remember the toy and the chocolate bar I mentioned before. I think you always give the toy. The chocolate bar, I think you have to do manually, I think, in every case. So if you're trying to fill out your flowchart, like again, here's the reason why you always make sure to steal at least one of those items from the supermarket earlier on. And then when you come back to on the run, you'll be starting in the motel. The other option is the inside the squat. So you have to cut through the fence with the wire cutter. I covered a couple different ways you can get a wire cutter, and you meet Ralph. And as you can see, the gun can come into play again. So Ralph looks a little bit psycho, but he's got certainly, I would say, out of all these, like, finishing the gun in the squats got the most potential for filling out your flowchart. So yeah, you have there's actually quite a bit of cross-chapter impact that flows from Kara staying in the squat with the gun. So definitely keep that in mind. And I guess theoretically the worst option would be inside the parking lot. That creates some Alice disapproval. Although you might be, if you're on your playthrough, you're trying to do that, then that's the thing to keep track of. You're gonna see it's pretty straightforward, but obviously you've got to do every single one of these different places to stay at if you're trying to do your whole flowchart. And we'll come back to the results of that and on the run in a second. Here's From the Dead. This is Marcus's comeback from the dead after being left for dead at the confrontation with Leo. So everybody thinks he's dead, and he's been thrown in a junkyard, and you basically wake up in android hell. It's pretty simple to do all the different parts of the flowchart. Definitely you'll get that in a couple playthroughs. It's just a matter of looking around. And there's not much cross-chapter impact, so we don't need to stay on that one for too long. This is Waiting for Hank. There's a brief scene with Amanda. If you died at the beginning of the game, check your graves. Oh, you know, always remember to check the magic stone if you're trying to fill out your flowchart. But no, it's a pretty... all the conversations with Amanda are pretty much follow those rules. If you pick the best ending with Carlos's android, then you have a chance to talk to Carlos's android again. It's very sad, but you can do that instead of sitting through. If you're doing this part of the game multiple times, you can do that instead of sitting through the conversation with Hank and Captain Fowler for the umpteenth time. Other than that, it's mostly just an issue of looking around. But keep in mind, you can see the famous painter dies. The magazine on this level is a bit tricky. So if you did pick the option which kills Carl, which is not fighting back against Carl's son, what you can do, you end up with different magazines based on the results. So if Carl dies, you get the famous painter as the second article. If Carl's alive, then robotic painting is the second article. So keep that in mind. That was actually the very last article I unlocked as I was going for my all article trophy, which you need for platinum. Won't cover the trophies too much, but I'll just but anyway, that's one little note I wanted to give on it. Otherwise, other than that, it is pretty straightforward. Looking around, you will only see Hank left to get lunch if Car and Alice died very early on. So if you want that part of the flowchart, I would just suggest a partial playthrough, because there's so much to do with Car and Alice that you really want your playthroughs with them alive. And here's On the Run. So man, you can see the pretty elaborate flowchart. You've got 3 different checkpoints you start with as you are doing this. This is all a bunch of different things that happen from you. Starting. So mostly filling out your flowchart at the beginning is mostly a matter of looking around. You are going. If you're in the motel, I remember it was like easy to miss the clock or stuff. But yeah, pretty. Sorry, that's morning in the parking lot. But you can see down here. It's mostly just a matter of looking around. You see cut and color hair because you are cross-chapter impact doesn't actually impact any of your choices, but whatever hair color you choose is with you for the rest of the game. So keep that in mind. And so sorry, boarding in the motels over here. So as I said, it's a little bit easy to miss the clock. I don't know why, but the most elaborate part of the flowchart is going to be Ralph. As you can see, you later on is over here is where it gets kind of tricky. Remember, so in this part of the flowchart, it's Ralph comes downstairs and he's demanding that Alice eat, and is Chet Gunn here? I know there's a part that has to do with the gun in this sequence. So when you're kind of putting your clothes on, you can forget the gun and then check the gun, and that's one of the pieces of flowchart progress that you should remember. So remember, again, this is the last chapter where the gun that you had to discover very early in the game can have an impact. So do remember that the gun carries over this far into the game. And then obviously, depending on the relationship you build in that very short sequence with between Car and Ralph, you end up with a very different string of events that come here. Ralph can basically either give them up, or Connor's got to do a little investigation. If Ralph is keeping them in hiding, you can goof and just leave without discovering them, or you can just have the natural part of the rest of the sequence trigger. Again, the rest of this is pretty straightforward. In the parking lot and the motel, it's pretty much just a matter of looking around. I've already kind of shown you that pretty extensively. There's some opportunities to goof that you'll have to come back and do the flowchart for. Reaching the train safely has some cross-chapter impact. I also remember, so when you start, remember when you, in the last thing when you do the squat, if you did the squat, that has cross-chapter impact I'll get into later. Yeah, there's a sequence that triggers if Connor discovers Car and Alice. Now, if you don't start in the squat, then there's a whole sequence where Kara and Alice have to try and evade the police. It's a bit tricky to do technically early on, but you do the QTEs, you can reach the train safely, and Connor never finds Kara. But otherwise, there's a chase, and these characters can get killed. And this is obviously for Connor, it's temporary because he comes back to life in a new body. But for Kara, it would be permanent. So it would be pretty sad to lose them this early in the game. Obviously, you can see it's pretty hard to mess up those. You'd have to be trying to mess up those QTEs intentionally. So, but that is how that chapter can play out. Next is Jericho. This is where Marcus has recovered from his resurrection, and he is now looking for other androids to find some solidarity with. It's a pretty straightforward level, so just a matter of looking around at everything. But this android body here, this first android body, it's after the fourth piece of graffiti. It's very easy to miss spotting it because it blends in so well with the car behind it. That's in the junkyard full of black and white cars. With the blue bin in it, it would be on the left side as you enter the junkyard. And it blends in, like I said, it blends in really well with that black car behind it. So just make sure you don't miss that. Otherwise, the level's pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot of cross-chapter impact. And then you meet the people of Jericho. And this is the nest. You start out, there's quite a good amount of opportunities to build or lose reputation with Hank as well as deviancy. If Connor, as long as Connor wasn't killed at the last level, you have a nice conversation with Hank where you can build some reputation with him. So, you do like the cholesterol and warn him about his friends and get some Hank rep. So you have a sequence where you're going to look around this deviant's apartment. Finding the diary could be pertinent to you having another option for finding Jericho later as Connor, so definitely take a look around. Obviously, you're probably only going to goof up this level as you're trying. You got to take a really long time to find Rupert, and then Hank leaves. There's like a lot of levels where that's just the rule. If you take too long, Hank is willing to leave. So there's a chase. I actually, believe it or not, I goofed this chase on my first playthrough. I took too many of the safe options, and that can cause you to lose Rupert. But take all the risky options, do the QTEs, and you will definitely keep pace with Rupert. At the very end of the level, you goof the wrong QTE, a couple QTEs, Connor can die. If you are going to be going at the end of the level, you get to choose between pursuing the deviant and making Hank mad at you and getting software stability, or you can make Hank like you a whole lot more if you choose to save him. it's time to decide. This is Marcus having a conversation with some deviants. You can see, very straightforward level. It's just a matter of looking around and finding everything. A little bit of chance to raise your reputation a little bit with, I think, it's just north. If you say a bunch of stuff to north other than asking about her past. But not much cross-chapter impact here, very straightforward, so we don't need to get into that one too much. Here is Zlatko, and this is a level that is a huge pain in the butt to get completed. So really the first major choice in the level, you just starts out with conversation, then things turn nasty after you listen to Zlatko's big villain speech. So it's very sad for Car and Alice that after escaping the clutches of Todd, they're now dealing with another complete monster, but that's just the way it is for the sad life of Car and Alice. And Car ends up in a machine that is going to, try to reset her and, make her the obedient servant of Zlatko. But it turns out it's not the end of the world if you get reset. So if you keep your memories, you escape from the machine, you go find Alice. It's pretty straightforward. As you can see, there's some flowchart progress that just comes from looking around as you're going after Kara. But if you do get reset, here's where there's a lot of flowchart progress to be had that might be very easy to miss. So I'll just point out a couple of the ones that most players will miss. So to get this piece of flowchart progress down here, A, of course, you need to get your progress reset on this level. B, you would have had to stay in the squat. And see out the RA9 symbol, I think you need to, I'm not sure if you need to look at Ralph as he's carving that, but you definitely need to see some RA9, and I guess more people got the RA9 because it's in that very first room, after you are done talking to your new master, Zlatko. And so yeah, just recovering your memories is just a matter of wandering around. So just do remember the RA9 and the fireplace are both tied to memories that you got from staying in the squat. If the recall escape is if you escaped without being, if you escaped from Connor without doing that whole sequence, if you just got directly on the train instead of doing that highway sequence, then you recall the escape by actually looking at the magazine. So that's how you do that little piece of flowchart progress. But yeah, this is as you can see, this is a pain in the ass level because it's like literally every pain in the ass you can have relating to your flowchart. You got to come back and goof. You've got to do the cross chapter stuff that I just mentioned. There's a lot of stuff that's technically difficult. The hiding sequence is a bit tricky. If you goof, it goes straight to chase started. Here's actually the trickiest part of the flowchart to get is actually spare right here. It doesn't look difficult, but really, it might be a little bit of a buggy part of the flowchart to unlock. So as you're hiding from Zlatko, if you haven't already killed the bathroom android and you go into the bathroom, he starts shouting for Zlatko, and you have the option to kill him, which is very straightforward. You just use a QTE, you go up to him, start the QTEs, and then boom, he's done. Now you can spare him, which silences him, but you don't always get proper flowchart credit for it. The way I did it finally was I did the very first part of reaching down towards his exposed android heart. I did that for like a split second, and then I did the doorknob for a split second, and then I left. And for some reason, that got me this piece of flowchart progress, which is really hard to get unlocked. But that was how I did that. So keep in mind, you're not going to get that if you get caught by Zlatko early, or if you decide to burn his house down, which is a lot of fun. Obviously, there's very elaborate chart in the chase, but one of my favorite things to do is burn down Zlatko's house. And that does save you from having to do a lot of the stressful hide in or run away from Zlatko bits. But you can burn down Zlatko's freaking house, which is awesome because he deserves it. But he gets more preoccupied with chasing you than he does actually saving his own house, which is surprising. But the level always ends with Luther joining the group. Oh, I forgot to mention, early in the level, you have the option to set, regardless of whatever, you have the option to set some monsters free. It is, if the monsters aren't there, then Luther delivers a shotgun blast to Zlatko's chest, which is very satisfying to watch, but you're really going to want to save the monsters just in case you end up in the scary chapter with Car and Alice at the end of the game. So here's Russian Roulette. Shouldn't take too long to get through this one. Again, it is a very simple level, just based on looking around without much cross-chapter impact. The level does seem to end prematurely if you find the picture of Hank's son earlier. Obviously, that could be very important to the very end of the game, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to miss not finding the picture of Hank's son. I think that, obviously it looks like there's a percentage that could, theoretically, but I've been able to do this whole level and find the picture of Hank's son, no problem. So, if you're just trying to get all that flowchart progress, save looking at the picture of Hank's son till a bit later on when you're doing that. Here's spare parts. This is the first mission that all the androids of Jericho go on together. It starts out pretty straightforward, and it gets a little more complicated later on. This is kind of where you start to define Marcus's character, as well as competency. So there's a very big decision here with John. It doesn't look significant, but it is, because whether or not you have John with you is going to be a big part to some of the things that happen in much later levels. So this is a big part of cross-chapter impact, even though it doesn't really make it obvious here. We'll get into that when we do Freedom March, which is several levels later, but there could be big implications to whether or not you decide to save John. If John gets left behind accidentally, it's a little buggy. I've had one game where they told me that John was left behind, but he came back later. So be aware with that. If you're trying to goof things and you leave John behind, he might surprise you and come back later. But yeah, obviously this is one of those levels you'll have to come back and goof to get all the flowchart progress. Or if you're trying to get spoiler, Marcus exiled from Jericho, then you might want to start goofing out. You might want to start failing early. I had to do an entire playthrough like that to, get all my flowchart progress. And here's another tricky part of the flowchart to do. So you can, if you decide to go to the control room to get even more stuff for Jericho, what can happen here is you've got a bunch of different options to steal the key. The one that's most complicated is if you decide to threaten the guards. Now, you have a QTE, it's pretty straightforward, but one of the more obscure bits would be if you... It's a little tricky to get it, but basically what you'd want to do is you'd want to succeed in the first half of the QuickTime event and then start goofing after there's a bit of a wrestling match where you're mashing one button. When I was playing on hard difficulty, it was after I started mashing triangle. And if you succeed in the first part of the QTE and fail in the second, you actually accidentally have to kill one of the guards with the gun to finish that, and then you run outside with the key to join the others. Actually, I think you kill both guards, and then at the very end of the level you have there's No one knows you actually killed the guards, I don't think, so it doesn't affect your reputation. But regardless of whether you spared the guard earlier, it does, it does tend to, it will put the blood in your hands sequence at the end of the level. There's some reputations that you gain or lose with people, but you won't have to stress too much about the individual characters. It's just about whether you want Jericho to love you or not. So this is the Eden Club. This is the most erotic part of the game, featuring lots of sexy androids, if you're into that. So this is about a person who got murdered in the Eden Club, and Hank and Connor trying to get to the bottom of that. So again, it is just a matter of looking around for the first bit. Obviously, you're on a time limit if you want to succeed the level, so hopefully your sleuthing skills are relatively decent with finding the correct androids in time. So at the end of the level, obviously there's two branches depending on whether or not you win the fight, but they basically end up with the results of you either the deviants die and from your hand, and or you spare them, and then Hank likes you even more, and you become even more software instability. So Pirate's Cove is going to be a really straightforward level. Where to find everything, you basically just need to look around. Just remember, as you're going through the first part of the level, as the fun fair, when it's just the three of you and you're kind of out in the snow looking for shelter, make a right as you're going through that, and you'll find a couple of the pieces of flowchart you might miss. Other than that, pretty straightforward. Like I said, just a matter of looking around. If you find the RA9 symbol, you get an extra conversation with Luther. And yeah, not much cross-chapter impact or complexities there. You always gain a bunch of reputation with Alice in this level, regardless of what you do. And here is the bridge. No point in not spoiling it. This is a level where Hank decides whether or not he wants to shoot Connor in the face. And the ending is totally dependent on your reputation that you have with Hank, with your affinity, whatever you want to call it. And this is the first level where your reputation with someone has a huge impact. You do have some last-minute options to gain or lose reputation with Hank. You'll probably lose a little bit regardless. But yeah, it's largely dependent on how healthy your relationship with Hank is on how this ends. And it's mostly just a matter of coming through picking different dialogue when you come through this level. And obviously, if Hank shoots Connor, that's putting you even further down the machine path. So yeah, pretty straightforward. So this is Stratford Tower. This is the level where the revolution really takes off. We are going to be looking at some bits later on. What do I need to say about this level? Oh, so this is where Simon's plot armor comes off, and there's a bit you can goof here early on if you don't lock the door, and if you don't lock the door, that guarantees an alarm. More on that soon. So there's a couple different conditions here where Simon can be injured, killed, etc. If you and obviously this is where the level where you first start to affect public opinion. So basically this is where you start announcing to the world that the androids are here, and whether you're planning to live in peace with the humans or violently resist them. This is where you really, like I said, you start to define Marcus' character, but here is where you really start. Marcus's relationship with the entire world really takes root. So you've got to think about two things: the relationship you're trying to build with the world, and whether or not you want to keep Simon alive. So it is possible to get the best result for everything. And just as an example, here's how you would do it. So let's say you wanted to keep Simon alive, and you wanted to have the best, most public opinion you could possibly get. Obviously, you'd want to threaten, you'd want to use the ruse with the guards, knock them out. Then there's a station operator who always runs away, and don't shoot the station operator. That would result in 0 casualties. Would make the androids look really good in the public. But of course, if you don't shoot the station op, there's 3 things that can cause the alarm: not shooting the operator, goofing with the guards, and then goofing way back here. Those all call guards to get summoned, and that damages Simon. And you might, if you're going for an absolutely pacifist playthrough, that's going to happen regardless. If you want to keep Simon totally safe for whatever reason, you'd have to compromise on your public reputation a bit and shoot the operator. But let's say you're going for the totally peaceful thing, and Simon's going to get shot after your big speech where you decide to be pacifist or what have you, and then you could leave Simon on the roof. Obviously, you're going to have to, if you execute him, you'll need to execute him once to get the flowchart progress on the following level. But let's say you leave Simon. We'll start covering the next level, which has a bunch of different flowchart progress that all stems from this level. So this is like, out of the whole game on Public Enemy, this is like the biggest case of one level causing a bunch of flowchart progress in the immediate one. As you can see, there's a bunch of little pieces of evidence that surface based on the choices you made in the preceding level. You could leave the crime scene without finding either android, but you'd have to be intentionally stay on the roof a long time and be intentionally goofing that up. Otherwise, filling out your flowchart is just a matter of doing that preceding level a bunch of different ways. Anyway, let's do Simon first, just to get that out of the way. So if you left Simon on the roof, which you'd get by damaging him and not execute, saving him, carrying him to the roof, and deciding to leave him behind, that string of choices, then Simon is still alive. And if you look around on the rooftop, you can find him as Connor, and that will lead into either just Simon dying and not much happening, or Connor can reach Simon, and he can have a very specific scene where he feels a bunch of Simon's feelings, but any of these choices result in Simon being dead, and you'll have Simon's body at the looking for Jericho sequence. But if you want to keep Simon alive, just choose not to find him, either by leaving the level or finding this other the station android, which we'll go to. So all you have to do to keep Simon alive and have the pacifist is just not find him. It's a little surprising that a crack team of CSI investigators could not find one android hiding in a closet, but that's just how it is, and we'll get more on that later. So this is assuming you ignore the roof or don't find him on the roof, or he's not on the roof, and you deal with the station androids. And it's a pretty straightforward sequence. It's pretty hard to mess that up. I'm assuming you can get through that interrogation. It's not too difficult. You just have to make sure you use you'll spot that android on basically the left side of the androids, and toward a couple of those end pieces of dialogue trigger him getting angry and attacking Connor, and Connor's got to put himself back together and then come and stop a big massacre. So obviously the best result for if you're trying to do positive Hank and free Connor would be to pull the gun and prevent the massacre. But as you can see, it's got a bunch of different things that can play out. Also, I forgot to mention, at the very start of the game, you actually have the chance to meet the cop from the hostage situation now. So hopefully you saved that cop in the hostage situation. He's on the left side. He could be a bit easy to miss at the very, very, very start of the game. And then you get to meet him again. And then you get to either save him again or dies horribly. But that's part of the flowchart progress. So Midnight Train, this is the very first nice human that Alice and Kara get to meet. Most of the level is just about watching a bunch of emotional drama play out in front of you and being sure to look around. I would say the hardest part of this level that you could miss is you can actually... So what happens towards the end of the level is a cop comes to snoop around. He's very easy to fool. More on that in a bit. But before or during him being in the house, you have to hide 3 pieces of evidence and tell some fibs to make sure he goes away. So you can actually, while you're in the earlier part of the level, you can actually read the magazine. And as you're reading the magazine, you could theoretically leave the magazine on the Android cover, and that means you have to deal with 4 pieces of evidence you have to hide instead of 3, because the Android cover in the magazine counts as a piece of evidence. So you come back to it while the cop is snooping around, and you make sure to turn the magazine back to the first cover you saw, and that's how you create and remove that 4th piece of evidence that you might have missed. Other than that, most of it's pretty straightforward, looking around. And as you can see, there are... this is the earliest part where Luther can die, and Luther, I can't even begin to understate it. There's so much Luther cross-chapter impact, Luther-dependent stuff in Crossroads, which is the biggest pain in the ass part of the game to get the flowchart unlocked in. But more on that in a bit. But yeah, whether or not you finish that, if you don't finish that, whether or not you have Luther, that's a lot of little flowchart progress stems from whether or not Luther's alive. So do keep that in mind. This is Capitol Park. This is easily my favorite level. Obviously there are some options to mess things up, and if the cops come, you've got some unique options to, if you somehow goof with the drone and the cops come looking, you've got a prank call you can pull on the cops, and that's kind of entertaining. So that's a bit you might miss. You can do that and still finish the level, no problem. Yeah, there's so assuming you don't goof early on in the level, which you'd pretty much be trying to do, you end up inside the store freeing a bunch of androids, and then you have one of the most entertaining parts of the game, where you have all of Capitol Park as a playground, and depending on whether you're pacifist or violent, you're either spraying pacifist graffiti everywhere to very epic music, or you're just smashing things and turning over things and burning things down. And remember, if you want, there's 2 ways to get the Molotov, to accept or refuse the Molotov from north, which is to go to the place where you plant the flag, the big kiosk gazebo looking thing, and or you can turn over a car, and that leads to you being able to burn a bunch of things, and that's very dramatic. And I don't know, I can never figure out where that I got the hotel once, and I always, anyway. But burning CyberLife, wow, is that dramatic? And that's an easy one to do. I can't believe how few players actually burn CyberLife. But yeah, so either way, it's turning that whole place in your little playground. I'm pretty sure you're limited both by time and the number of things that you can do, so that will require some playthroughs to come back here and make sure you've smashed or tagged everything, or goofed in every possible way. But Definitely not one of the more complicated flowcharts, but definitely one of the more fun ones. You can do Marcus failed to deliver his message and still end up with a decent shift in public opinion. Oh, and finally, if you let the crowd decide, the crowd will kill the 2 police officers, even if you're totally pacifist, so do keep that in mind. And this is the Meet Kamsky level, and this is your last level to kind of establish your relationship with Hank and your kind of freedom stats for Connor. Pretty straightforward. Obviously, there's different starts based on what happened to Connor in the Stratford Tower level, and there's little speeches a little different based on what happens in the Capitol Park level. But basically, this is pretty straightforward. You've got a lot of time where you're waiting on Kamsky anyway, so it should be pretty easy to grab all these pieces of the flowchart while you're doing that. And then you make a big choice. And this is a part of the game, I was a little bit irritated. So on my first playthrough when I did this, I actually I did the evil machine choice, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, most players choosing to spare Chloe because, I mean, you know, come on, how could you not spare Chloe? But I was a bit more machine my first playthrough, so I actually, like a lot of players, I shot Chloe, and then Kamsky told me something which was totally useless anyway, because I asked about RA9. As you can see, was not the only player to kind of get baited into that going after information that turned out to be totally useless from Kamsky, because you see RA9 the whole game, and there it is. You think you're going to solve the mystery, but you don't. So the only actual useful information you can get from Kamsky is Jericho location. So that's like one of the 5 ways you can find Jericho, and that'll skip a bunch of the following chapter if you do that. Take you through a path that skips a bunch of chapter, or you can just make Hank like you more and express your freedom and unwillingness to kill cute androids. So this is the Freedom March, and this is the level where you get to decide your relationship with North here. Obviously, you'd need to have some North approval, so you would have had to. Whether you're violent or pacifist doesn't seem to make a huge impact, even though North never seems to approve of pacifist you. But if you did everything competently throughout the game, you should still have a very solid reputation with North. And you have a conversation with North, and you basically decide if you share memories, that's basically romance with North. I actually did that, and I goofed. My last playthrough, I actually goofed the QuickTime event twice just as a joke, and that keeps you on the platonic path with North. You're just friends if you don't reach out in time. So, and that's got a decent amount of cross-chapter impact for sure, because there's quite a few little places where having North as a romance can come into play. So here's the sequence. So as I was talking before when we were in Public Enemy, if you left Daniel on the rooftop and somehow Connor and the entire crack team of CSI investigators missed finding Simon hidden in the closet, he comes back, and I still had a solid reputation with Simon, and he hugs it out with Marcus, and Simon is back on board with the revolution. So that's a thing. And then, as if the revolution wasn't dramatic enough, there's a final big march down the square. Obviously, this part of the sequence is just about making sure you look around and find all the androids you can convert. And then you start a big march down the city to a city square. And that's pretty straightforward. But here's where things start getting a little more elaborate, and there's some cross-chapter impact. So big SWAT team shows up, you have to choose how you're going to deal with them. If you, there's a whole chain of sequences that have to do with standing your ground peacefully, or attacking, or choosing to run away. So you can see it's pretty elaborate. There are some options here to make sure that Marcus does not give his life early. So for the police to gun Marcus down, you'd have to choose to sacrifice himself, and John and Simon would have to both be dead for this part. And the aggressive version of that is basically this part after. Like again, you have to, for things to go badly if you attack, you have to make the fail all the QTEs. Obviously, you will lose someone regardless if Marcus chooses to sacrifice himself. So if you keep all that in mind, obviously a bunch of androids get gunned down no matter what you do. Probably a few more if you flee, but fleeing is fleeing after your first option. I wouldn't flee as your first choice, unless you just happen to need that for the flowchart progress. But fleeing will help keep all the major characters alive. You never see John again after this chapter anyway, but that is how that. So this is chapter with so much a lot of cross-chapter impact flows out of this one. So this is Last Chance Connor. One of the last conversations with Amanda there, and then Captain Fowler tells you you're off the case. But obviously Connor's got a mission, and obviously not many players left for Jericho immediately. But because they would have had to kill Chloe and ask about Jericho. But if you do, you do get a slightly different, more enlightened feeling conversation with Hank. Because rather than you being desperate and out of time, Hank is literally just stopping you to talk about, talk about Connor and, talk about Connor and deviancy and freedom and all that good stuff. And he mentions the last time you were really empathetic with an android or him. So that's a bit a lot of players would have missed, but otherwise, you are just going to be through this. Okay, and here's where it gets elaborate. So I mentioned there's before in Kamsky, there's one chance to get Jericho's location. Leading up, what you choose to say to Gavin will decide whether you have a fight with him at the end. And then here you basically end up with, this looks very elaborate, but basically this boils down to you combining different pieces of evidence and rearranging android parts. And obviously there's a bunch of the android bodies you have at your disposal, and clues you have at your disposal will depend on the choices you've made. I had one playthrough where I had literally every body and every piece of evidence possible. I'm fairly sure it is possible to do that. Although of course you can't have Simon and Station Android's body at the same time, but you could basically have the full lineup of androids filled out and plenty of evidence to mix with them. So basically there's 4 ways to solve the case. You can have Rupert is the android who loved the birds, so you can have his diary and scan him, and that's a way to solve the case. There's if you were really nice to Carlos's android, you can get the clue from Carlos, smash the statue, and then link that with some of the other evidence. I think you can scan it from the station android's location. That's the way to do it. There's a very grisly scene where you can trick the 2 androids from the Eden Club into revealing the location. That's just nasty. And there's if you have either the station android or Simon, you always have the evidence from Marcus's speech, so you can use that to trick them and find the way to Jericho, which is the way the majority of players do it. And it is possible, of course, not to have any evidence. So that's how you'd get that. That would be pretty. You'd have to plan that whole playthrough around that, basically, which I did. But yeah, those both, you can see insufficient evidence, that's 2%, or if you just stand around at the start of the level for no good reason, that can lead to Connor getting decommissioned, or taking too long to solve the investigation, that can be Connor decommissioned, and that affects what happens in Crossroads quite a bit, and you never see Connor again, basically. If Connor's decommissioned, that's permadeath for Connor. And you can choose to have, you might end up with a nice little fight with Gavin at the end. That could be the last time Connor was destroyed. So this death here for Connor would be the 8th and final death that you would need for the trophy. Keep in mind, you'd have to do 8 deaths for Connor in one playthrough, and that's the final death of those 8 for that trophy. That's the most difficult trophy to get. So keep in mind, yeah, you saw all the Connor deaths you up to this point. You would have had to get that and then have Gavin kill him here, and that's what you need for that trophy. And now finally, oh boy, we are at Crossroads, and out of pretty much all the sequences that you have to plan for, Crossroads is really what you need to plan for the most. Obviously, the very last level, there's a lot of planning to do for it as well, and there's so much stuff that leads into Crossroads. There's so much impact from Crossroads. It is one of the most elaborate levels to plan around by far if you're going to try and see everything there is to see in Detroit Become Human. But we're starting with Connor's level. Obviously, a very big choice for Connor is you can see right here, becoming deviant. Obviously, most players are going to have a conversation with Marcus because they've kept Marcus alive. But if Marcus either died or, spoiler, was exiled, you're going to be having that deciding whether, you're going to be having that big decision in front of North instead. And North gives the same speech, only the delivery's very different but equally dramatic. And you get to decide whether you want to remain a slave to your machine overlords or become a free fighter alongside Jericho. It's a big decision for Connor. It leads to very different choices, very different sequence for Connor at the very end of the game. And Connor's flowchart's pretty elaborate. So if Connor remains a machine, it's a bit simpler. Connor can die Connor actually ends up with a fight in the bomb place instead of Marcus. Basically, whoever wins that event is dependent on how hard you mash the button. When Marcus is going for the gun, if you mash it hard, Marcus kills Connor. If you don't, Connor kills Marcus. So that's one of the several ways that Marcus can die off in this level. I mean, if Machine Connor dies, it's not really a huge impact, but obviously you'd have to look for all the different ways to kill him off to fill out your flowchart. And I think pretty much, unless you kill Connor in the hold, then Machine Connor's always going to die in some way, shape, or form on that level. If you decide to make Connor deviant, it's certainly a lot more elaborate. Obviously, Connor is going to take over Marcus's mission if he's dead or not present at Jericho. If he's temporarily exiled, you can see there's. I know I'm going through this kind of fast, but if Connor dies if Marcus dies at a certain point, then you can see here Connor takes over Marcus's mission, and obviously anytime Marcus dies, you're not going to get the happiest ending, but But yeah, Connor can literally do all the things that Marcus would have done if he were alive. You know, save a bunch of androids. You can't ever save Josh. Um, Josh always dies if Marcus is dead. I guess they just decided that was a thing. But I'm trying to think. But yeah, so and remember, if Deviant Connor dies, he becomes Machine Connor again. So do keep that in mind. Next, yeah, and again, this is one of the longer bits to get through because obviously there's so much flowchart flowing into and out of Crossroads. So as you can see, big impact from whether or not Luther's alive. Oh my god, there's just so much to get through here. But obviously it's going to be pretty rare for players to abandon Kara, but honestly, there's so many ways that Kara and Alice can die. But I don't think anything is sadder than any of the results where Kara actually abandons Alice. So to have this part of the flowchart where so they stay together. If Jericho is never attacked because Connor gets decommissioned, they stay together regardless, and they just go straight into the Kara leaving Detroit sequence. But Jericho's going to get attacked most of the time because Connor's going to find it most of the time. And if Jericho's attacked and you really have to be distant, you really have to be be planning it from the very, very, very start of the game. And either, depending on whether it's Alice by herself or Luther, they can both leave Kara's side, and you can decide that to leave Kara or to leave Alice forever, which pretty much ends Kara and Alice's story right there. Or you can decide you're going to find Alice. Obviously, very few players chose to be distant from Alice or distant enough from Alice that they see any of that, but that is possible that they can actually grow apart, one of the saddest things ever. But even if you grow apart from Alice from that sequence, you can just decide to just go find her again. So, but most players won't see any of these early bits. They're just going to end up in the corridor, running from guards. Most of it's pretty simple QTE stuff. Obviously, saving Luther, it's another chance to lose Luther here. And I think it's pretty straight. I'm guessing most people are going to choose to save him. And this is where it gets a bit convoluted. So this whole sequence it looks very convoluted, but this is like a sequence that literally plays out over just 2 minutes. And it's basically a string of choices where you're running away from guards and you're deciding how to get away from them. So obviously the best results has to do with you deciding at some point to play dead and continue to play dead, and then you fool the guards, and then you end up back, and then you escape Jericho, and you're going to end up in the sequence of events with Kara leaving Detroit. There's a bunch of goofs you can make where Kara gets captured, but most people would probably make a goof here. And if you try to run away, or if you surrender, or you try to run away in some dumb way, you're probably going to end up with Kara and Alice captured. If you try to fight them, you're either going to kill off Luther, or you're going to kill off who comes to save you, or you're going to kill off Kara and Alice permanently. And then that's the end of their story right there. And here is Marcus, and obviously you could have killed Marcus off in Freedom March, which means you'll just do, depending on who's alive, you'll just see a quick sequence with the other main Jericho androids talking to each other. Another rare thing, you could get exiled from Jericho, either temporarily or permanently, depending on what you decide. But most players, I think, are going to not see any of that. But if you do decide if you do get exiled from Jericho because you messed up too many previous missions, you can still choose to come back. But if you do decide to just be an exiled Marcus, you do get one of these little short extra sequences at the very end of the game. They're called secret endings, I guess. And you could see Marcus back in that spot where he was with North earlier. This is other than that, your typical playthrough, you're gonna be Marcus fighting to save the androids. You could goof and kill off Marcus early in a bunch of sequences by either taking too long or goofing a couple of the QTEs in a row. So I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss anything here. So let's see here. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. Alright, so yeah, as you can see, a bunch of ways Marcus could get killed off. As I mentioned earlier, Connor could end up taking over the mission. And then you have a choice to leave North or save North at the very end. North can have some cross-chapter impact for sure. Yeah, hopefully that covers everything for Marcus. So that was Crossroads, like I mentioned, because there's so much stuff that leads into it and flows out of it. One of the most difficult chapters to plan around for sure. Now we're in Night of the Soul, second to last chapter of the game. So obviously a couple different ways this can start based on whether Carl was alive, which is a little, which I covered way back there. If Carl is still alive because you pushed over his son, remember these 3 parts of flowchart progress most people are going to miss, and this is probably some of the most missable parts of flowchart progress because A, it depends on you doing something really early on the game, and that you can only pick one of these 3, and they depend on what you chose very early at the beginning of the game. And B, it would depend on you deciding to explore the house enough that you wanted to visit the downstairs. So you will have to plan 3 playthroughs just around getting these 3 types of flowchart progress if you were going through 100%. But yeah, that's pretty straightforward. If you played the piano at the beginning of the game, you come back and you touch the piano, and if you read the books at the beginning of the game, you come back and look at the books, and if you played the chess, you come back and you look at the chess. You don't do it all over again. You just come back and acknowledge you once did it, basically. And you can see your painting again that you got at the very beginning of the game, if Carl's still alive. So, as you can see here, this is where the very end. Now, if there's a couple different sequences here where Marcus died in Freedom March. So one of these, the rarest, is Marcus dying in Freedom March and Connor being decommissioned. So that's where you see a sequence where North is among the people in Jericho deciding she's going to attack. So you only end up in the church if Jericho was attacked. It's the same thing with Marcus. If Connor was decommissioned, he could end up delivering the speech from the boat instead of the church. But obviously most people are going to have Connor and Marcus alive, so you're going to see the speech being delivered from the church. If you decide to it's pretty much obligatory, you have to talk to everybody, and then you get to decide whether to whether you want to do a violent revolution or a peaceful demonstration, which leads directly into what you're going to be doing with Marcus in the following chapter. You get to decide Connor's fate. It just says trust Connor or don't trust Connor, but that basically is your decision about whether or not you're going to shoot him in the head. And if you shoot him in the head, guess what? He comes back again. He comes back as Machine Connor. I almost forgot this. This is so. Thin Ice. That's if you decide That's just with sequence. You see if you got killed as Deviant Connor. She doesn't mention that you're Deviant, but that's basically you have to get killed as. Or maybe you get that if you also die early as Machine Connor. I'm not sure, but this is a very depressing. So this is if you have a horrible relationship with Hank the entire game. He decides to commit suicide, and there's no way to talk him out of it. You can get this as Deviant Connor, believe it or not, and he can be in his Deviant Connor outfit and still have to watch Hank die. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that makes Connor deviant. Is also stuff that can make Hank like you, but it's not total crossover. So this sequence here would be Connor joined the revolution in Crossroads, so that you'd have let's see. So you'd need Deviant North, Marcus dead. I think checking on Josh would be one of the hardest things, because I think you'd need to Marcus to die. Basically, I think the only way to have Josh alive is if you'd have to have Marcus die in the hold. You'd have to have Marcus die in the hold, trying to disarm the bomb. You'd have to have Connor deviant. That's what you'd need to do that, and you don't get speeches from either of these guys. You just literally get that flowchart progress by checking on them. Ooh, alright, and finally we are at the very end of the game. I'm sure the very end, how the story can end for all the characters is probably one of the more deeper points of interest. But yeah, this is a 100% flowchart video, so we had to go through it all. So here's where so 6 flowcharts in total, 2 for each character at the very end of the game. So you literally have 2 unique chapters for each character, depending on the decisions you made throughout the entire game. And this is one of the shorter ones. This is if Connor stayed a machine or was a deviant and got killed off. And it's very dramatic. So you can actually, if this is a bit bizarre, because if you can have anywhere from a good to a not great relationship with Hank, and he will intervene. Even if you have a really good relationship with him, he will intervene if you're Machine Connor. You can decide not to have a fight with him if you had a really good relationship with him, and then you talk about his son. But you can pretty much expect that a fight's going to happen, and between somebody, and you're never going to succeed in sniping someone from the roof. There's always something that happens that keeps you from killing Marcus or North early. If Hank committed suicide, like I said, the fight is very dramatic with Hank and can play out in a couple different ways, including, one of them killing each other. If Hank's already dead, then you can have a very big dramatic fight with Captain Allen, who was at the very start of the game. Or you can dramatically suicide. So that is how all the ways that chapter can play out. Now, just going to need you to excuse me for a minute. I'm going to be... I'll give you a second to look at this flowchart. I need just a second to take care of something and come back. But this is the end of the flowchart for if Connor is deviant and he's been alive pretty much for a good couple sequences. Alright, everybody, sorry about the delay there. So this is Connor infiltrating the tower. He's still a deviant, but he's dressed up like, you know, he's back in his regular old machine outfit. And obviously there's a couple ways you could goof early on in the level by either staying on the elevator forever or goofing with the guards. There's a camera you can hack on the elevator that will keep you from doing the fight sequence. It's a very badass fight sequence though, so well worth looking at. And now here is probably one of the rarest bits for players because it's just a tiny little piece of flowchart progress. That's just slightly different from but you could end up fighting the evil Connor who shows up to stop you without Hank there. But because the stuff that makes Connor deviant and the stuff that makes Hanks like you is so interlinked, it's probably going to be pretty rare for people. But it is possible to do that. And either way, you end up in either you end up in a fight with Machine Connor where he gets the upper hand and you have to try to pull back from it, try to recover from, you know, being pretty close to destroyed by evil Connor, or you end up with a scuffle and then basically Hank is deciding your fate, and you can, you know, based on who knows the most about him, and you could goof that up, but the game points out to you that the correct answer is Cole, and but one of the more dramatic endings I thought was actually where when you're converting the android, if you smash square enough when you're converting that android before the evil android gets the better of you, you can actually have you can see that's the androids woke up 2%. You can actually die as Connor, but you will have already managed to spread the deviancy virus to all the androids, and then evil Connor will be freaking out as all the androids start waking up. And if you choose to do nothing, that's how you talk to new Connor. He'll actually you've already lost, and then that whole thing plays. It's very dramatic, but yeah, that's all the ways that this level can play out. And obviously getting the androids woke up with Hank would be part of the survivor's trophy, which I guess you'd need for what would be considered the very happiest ending. And here's Carl leaving Detroit. This is the only chapter here that could flow into another chapter here, because if you goof at the start, you get captured by the guards. You could end up being transferred over to the car captured chapter. If you're gonna have to save Luther at some point. If you want to keep him alive, if Luther died earlier, then you're saving the Jerrys, which could come in handy. Then there's a whole sequence there if you happen to end up at the checkpoint. Obviously, there's a lot of flowchart related to getting through the security checkpoint, and it won't affect the level, but obviously you'll have to come back through there a couple playthroughs. At the bus terminal, can end badly if you stand in one of the bad parts of the bus terminal. They're pretty much the guards that can kill you here. Stand in one specific corner, or if Todd gets angry with you, you ending up having to give up Luther early, and then you end up running, and you really don't want to end up at the river because that tends to be some of the sadder endings, but it is a unique sequence within a sequence, the at the river and the Canadian border. And so you end up at the river. If I think most people though would probably end up at the river because they felt bad and didn't want to steal tickets from the family. So, assuming obviously this is a looking around, you'll have to some different parts of the flowchart depend on whether Marcus is protesting peacefully or not. And you just I always miss that TV screen. It's not the actual little TVs, but the big schedule behind it. So make sure you don't miss that. So we'll do the unhappy ending first. So if you return the tickets or something happened to get the guard's attention and Luther had to give his life yet again to bail you out, then you're gonna end up at the river. But hopefully you could end up at the river with Luther as well if you return the tickets. That's key. It's a little bit hard to spell out in the flowchart here, but basically you end up in a boat. You have a big sad farewell with Rose. You end up on the river on a boat, and you have a whole bunch of choices that you can make that are basically going to determine. It's never going to end well, but it's basically going to determine what is going to happen to the people who are left. So, if Luther is still with you, you can hide behind Luther, and that keeps Kara and Alice safe. Whoever's injured here is basically going to end up dead. Luther is always injured. So, if you're trying to get the happiest ending you can at this point, best option is to hide behind Luther. I think hide damages Alice. I think protect Alice damages Kara. Yeah, and accelerate is a bad option. I think that pretty much just messes up the whole group. And then obviously surrender is a horrible option. So then you end up having to remove a bunch of things from the boat. You got to throw Luther in the river if he's there. The supplies you got to row, and then you got to get rid of the engine. And then Kara dives in the water to push the boat, and obviously the ending depends a bit on how much you lighten the boat, but and who got injured. I know it's pretty elaborate. You might want to look at a mini guide for that, but anyway, yeah. So the ending where Karis and Alice survives. That again, that depended on hiding behind Luther. If you kept Kara undamaged by protecting her, then you might have to ask her to go in alone. If Alice dies from because you hid or something like that, then you pretty much end up having to decide whether Kara is going to go on living alone or not. Obviously, like, these endings are all pretty sad. Even I mean, Kara and Alice survived isn't the saddest, but you know, obviously you would have had to deal with losing Luther at some point. Now let's go on to the other sequence that could happen, and that's where you reach the Canadian border. And the only way to get here, of course, is to make it through all these hurdles and steal the tickets from the couple. Most of this is when you get to this point, most of this is pretty straightforward. There's a little bit of more chapter dependent TV stuff based on what Marcus is doing, but mostly it's just a matter of looking around and everything. And at the very end of the game, your options depend. Actually, one of your options depends on Marcus again. So if you didn't want to kill if you wanted to basically get the happiest ending to the game, you need to have Marcus protesting peacefully, and then that makes the border security guard, he looks at the TV, he becomes more sympathetic to you. And then if you had Luther with you, you could choose sacrifice no one. You could get the same ending where Luther and Kara and of course Alice all survive if you sacrifice the Jerrys, but why do that if you have, you know, anyway, but yeah, so obviously there's a string of consequences based on who you pick. Alice can sacrifice herself, Alice can sacrifice Luther. You pretty much see how it can play out. Alice can end up alone in Canada if Luther died earlier, and with Rose, if Luther died earlier, I think you have to talk to Rose to. I'm not sure. You must have to talk to Rose for that. I'm not sure, but yeah, if Kara sacrifices herself, then Rose basically ends up adopting Alice at that point. I think Rose will actually pop up if Kara dies. Kara sacrifices herself, and she'll come and hug. You know, she'll come and see Luther, and Alice. But one of the absolute rarest endings of the game would be Luther and Alice alone by themselves. Not just, you can see there's two variations on this Alice got to Canada with Luther, which barely any player saw, but on that there's another, like I said, there's a variation. So if you didn't talk to Rose and you never asked her to stay with Luther, that's another variation on this very rare ending. So you just see Luther and Alice together, or you can see Luther and Alice and Rose. But yeah, like I said, the happiest ending, if you want the Survivor's Trophy, happiest ending in the game is Luther and Alice and Kara together, obviously. So this is Kara captured. There's a lot of points where Kara can be captured when she's running away from guards in Crossroads, or she could goof at the start of the other sequence. There's a lot of the flowchart here is just from Kara being slow early on, the flowchart progress. So that's pretty simple to get through. So here's a very, very, very sad. You can see I did. After the androids take off, are asked to take off their skin, and there's a sequence where Kara can volunteer to drag a body out, and she could actually abandon Alice. Just one of the worst things you can picture any character doing. But they could both survive at that point. This is one of the weird things where the violent revolution will not get you to the happiest endings, but it could affect the outcome of what's going on here in Kara Captured. So you can see, as you can see, the successful violent. Keep in mind, Alice freed by. See, any of the things where it said freed by Marcus, that depends on Marcus succeeding in a violent revolution. So again, you can't. The violent revolution never gives you the very happiest ending, but it can give you a close to the very happiest ending, depending on how you look at it. And the violent revolution can actually save the whatever characters are stuck in the internment camp in a couple circumstances. But you can see a lot of cross-chapter impact comes from that. You can meet some of the other androids that you saw very early in the game again. And the androids that you freed, the monster androids you freed in Zlatko can come back and help you out if you want to. Luther, obviously, and the this is Ralph, who was in the squat. There's a bit of flowchart quite a decent little chunk of flowchart progress that relates to him. And he does some surprising things here, which I'll get into in a minute. But obviously you want to... he'll only die if I think you make some bad choices when you are talking to him. But yeah, you can meet Ralph again. And then the story keeps progressing as you're looking for Alice, and then you push forward in the line so you can meet her. You're separated from Alice, but there's a lot of ways that things can end badly for all the characters in this chapter. It was very tough chapter to get through emotionally because I had to watch all these terrible things happen to Alice and Kara, but I did it. And so yeah, you can get help from the other androids. You can, if Alice's stress gets too high, that's the top part of the flowchart. But obviously it's pretty easier to keep her calm. Let's see here. If you don't move when the guard tells you, then there's a bunch of stuff relating to getting injured and dying in the lines. You can see it's all pretty straightforward. You will have to come back through here. It's one of those levels you just have to play again and again to watch horrible things happen to people, and there's a bit of, you know, cross-chapter dependency. Let's see here. So another hard thing to watch is one of the flowchart progress that I got relatively late was Luther reaching. So if you're in line for too long, Luther will end up having to step into the recycling machine. That was probably one of the flowchart things I got relatively late. The car and Alice survived that you see right here. This is from, as you can see, it's from Marcus Liberates Androids. So that's if Marcus does a successful violent revolution, then you never have to deal with you don't have to deal with pretty much any of this end part of this flowchart. It goes straight into that ending, and that's the same ending regardless of whether Luther is alive or dead. If Luther's alive, there's just you see him do a little smile, but that's about it. Assuming you're not rescued prematurely by Violent Revolution Marcus, then this is a whole sequence where you gotta, use some androids. Some androids have to give their life to make a diversion for Kara after she finds the escape route by the barbed fence. So, as you can see, there's a very elaborate chain of horrible things that can happen once you reach that barbed wire, and all the chain of stuff that happens from there's Kara's too. If you just, for whatever reason, you decide to just sit there at the barbed wire, then there's some horrible things that happen. If Kara's too damaged, if she took a bullet earlier from either the drone or the guards, then that's this little part of the chain here. And then there's a bunch of things that stem from Kara deciding to fight the guards. And if Kara runs, it's bad. If Kara tries to run, it's bad endings. If Kara tries to fight, it's good endings unless Luther or Ralph is dead. It's a little bit buggy, the flowchart, unlocking flowchart. If Luther and Ralph are dead and you decide to run, anyway, this part can be a little bit buggy with unlocking the flowchart progress, but yeah, I got through it. And yeah, but obviously the right choice is to. And one of the most surprising things, actually, I think, was Ralph coming out of the woodwork if you mess up the fight to save everybody. That was, I guess, surprising. But then again, he did deliver the big speech about wanting to save everyone. So, but yeah, good on you, Ralph. So here's the violent revolution. This is where Marcus decides to launch a violent revolution. If North becomes the leader of the movement, typically through Marcus dying, she's always going to attack. She's always going to fail. You're going to get a slightly different ending depending on whether Connor is alive or not. I would say one of the rare parts of the flowchart to see would be no choice. Would be if Connor follows the store into follows North in the store, then Machine Connor follows North in the store, then they could, and you don't make a choice, then they actually shoot each other. I'm guessing that would be one of the rare parts of the flowchart for people to see. So But yeah, let's see. There's a violent revolution. Um, and no matter what happens, Josh never lives. So that's stuff. There's a lot of stuff in Violent Revolution which is Simon dependent. So if you're trying to go through a 100% flowchart, you'd want Simon to live to this point. Oh, and I forgot. Yeah, I forgot to mention all the Simon dependent stuff in Freedom March. But anyway, so and obviously there's a scene down here where that's it just looks like regular flowchart. There's a big dramatic scene if Marcus gets injured. You pretty much have to be trying to hurt Marcus, really. But if Marcus is injured and you have a romance with North, North can offer her heart. It's very dramatic. Simon can do the same thing. Obviously, there's no romance there, or is there? Who knows? And Simon can offer his heart if that happens. Regardless, if he's alive and North is not the romantic partner, and Marcus is too injured to continue, then one of those two characters can give their life to save Marcus. And if neither of those characters are alive or particularly cares for Marcus, then he dies and the revolution fails. So if you get injured, the other way to fail is just from just too many androids getting mowed down, which I typically do at the machine gun, which is right towards the end of the sequence. But you can also, if you want to get this one little piece of flowchart progress, let's see, where Simon gets shot, very hard piece of flowchart progress to get, because you'd need Simon alive, and then you'd need to if you make it all the way to machine guns, I don't think that I don't think you get credit for that. You have to lose this revolution like very early on by just sending, a lot of androids to die and then dawdling. But there are 9, count them, 9 different endings that all stem from if Marcus loses the revolution. Well, 10 if you count the injured one. So, no, there's 11. There's 11 different endings where Marcus loses the revolution. 9 of them are just from if too many androids die. So they've done 9 different endings for that are all down here for what happens if too many androids die during the war and Marcus's revolution. So some of them depend on so 3 of them are if Marcus and North have a romantic relationship, and one of the darkest possible endings to the game, I feel like, is is if Marcus and North are lovers and they decide to set off the dirty bomb. No innuendo meant there. They just decide that that's how they're going to retake everything, and you can set off if there's no Connor, if Connor's not alive. There's 3 different endings where Marcus can set off the dirty bomb, but Marcus only lives to see the ending if Connor is deviant or decommissioned. But then there's of course Connor, Machine Connor, following Marcus into the store, and that's just always a bad ending. Well, they're all bad endings, but those are just the worst endings for Marcus. And Connor can actually choose to spare Marcus, and then Marcus can just choose to kill pretty much everybody. It's just, that's just the worst, I guess. But of course, most people are going to end up in a successful revolution, and and there's if you still have Machine Connor, as you can see, very dramatic fight can happen. Connor shows up on the battlefield right after Marcus gets disoriented by that tank blast, but of course, conveniently, the gun gets tossed out of Connor's hand, and they end up in a dramatic melee fight. You can decide which of the characters you want to control, and then they fight each other, and in melee, and you pick how the revolution's going to end based on that. So obviously, if Marcus beats Connor, that's the Marcus's revolution succeeding. But yeah, very dramatic. And if you want like one of the most grisly deaths for Connor possible, and there are a lot of them, you can choose to control Connor, mess up the QTEs, and Marcus will actually, when he's fighting him with his shield, he'll more or less end up decapitating Connor. Not completely cutting the head off, but like almost most of the neck sliced away with this shield thing, and then Connor's like, "Oh, I will never stop." But I mean, that's Marcus succeeding in the revolution, basically. And as I mentioned before, the successful revolution can tie into some of the endings for Kara if she happens to be captured. And this is again, this is the last part. This is the very last thing we're going to cover. This is one of the 3 pieces of the Survivor's Trophy if you want the happiest ending revolution. Like I said, Josh always dies in the Violent Revolution, so to keep Josh alive, you pretty much have to be doing a peaceful revolution. So that's so he does count as one of the main characters. So and obviously it's not as elaborate as the Violent Revolution, but they do decide to throw some pitfalls here. When you're in the barricade, this is mostly just getting this flowchart progress is it's mostly just a matter of looking around. I have missed looking at the detonator because you have to taking the detonator with you when you're doing Peaceful Marcus is a bit of an atypical choice, but it'll happen automatically after you talk to North if you're missing that part of your flowchart. And obviously taking Perkins' deal is a bad ending. Because, I mean, come on, he's a scummy FBI agent. What do you expect? Obviously, North will be in that sequence, so that's part of the flowchart progress. But yeah, at the end, the soldiers come and attack your peaceful protest. If there's again another dramatic sequence where North can save Marcus, if is possible if you somehow mess up the QuickTime events. North can take a bullet from Marcus and say how much she loves him. Most people are going to save these. Are going to save all these androids, and then obviously you have 2 ways to get the best ending. They both depend on having a good reputation with the public, so they need to be at least supportive, or wait, I think they can be sympathetic or supportive. And you can always choose to sing, regardless. If you've got a romance with North, you can kiss North, and either of those, and a good reputation gives you the president decides to spare the androids, and anything else leads to a. If you sacrifice is crazy. Marcus, out of the blue, with nothing to help him, just sets himself on fire, and that's a sad ending. You can always choose that. I'm not sure why. If you have the detonator with you, this is a really weird thing to have weird ending to pick during a peaceful protest, but you can actually decide at the last second to give up on peace and have a violent ending to everything where Marcus's skin comes off and he's shouting, "We are free." So some flowchart progress there for the detonator. And if you just do nothing, then it's not a bad ending. So that's everything, guys. That was I have covered 100% of the flowchart for Detroit Become Human. Hopefully I did literally everything you can think of. Hopefully I didn't scroll too fast and everyone got more than enough information on everything that could possibly happen in the game and some of the obscure endings and anything that could have happened there and what some of the challenges to getting that done were. So yeah, if anybody has any questions that they have for me, just leave something in the comments below, and I'll answer any questions. Try to get you any information that you have about 100% flowchart playthrough, And yeah, might do more videos that relate to 100% Flowchart if there seems to be any kind of demand for that. And hopefully that was informative and fun for everybody. So that is it for me. I hope you guys really enjoyed. And until next time, I will see you Starside.